Hi everyone, my name is Kylie Wintersteen and I'm going to be talking about critical theory and Disney films examining and critiquing privilege and oppression of characters in Aladdin, Pocahontas, and Mulan. So just a brief overview. This is going to be the structure that I follow for my presentation. Jumping right into things, my introduction. I started pretty early off with a research question knowing that I wanted to use critical theory and Disney films. So my research question that I came up with was, how can critical theory be applied to critique oppression represented in the selected Disney films and songs in each film? And how does this critique provide a foundation that leads to societal improvement? So the overall motivation of this was societal improvement. I wanted to be able to make suggestions and have practical actions for what can be done to better the society we live in. So I chose 3 films that represented different types of oppression. I used Aladdin for economic oppression, Mulan for gender-based oppression, and Pocahontas for racial and ethnic oppression. So, as mentioned before, I used critical theory as my general framework that I was analyzing the artifact through. And critical theory is a set of theoretical frames that examine domination in a society with the goal of emancipation for people, meanings, and values. So essentially, it looks at the different oppression that's taking place and does something about it in order to liberate the people that are involved in being oppressed, and it does this through critique, which is an evaluation of oppressive ideologies and exploitative structures with the goal of improving society and understanding. So there we get back into our motivation where we're improving society, and that's the whole purpose of critique. And one of the things that stood out particularly about critical theory is that it's a multidisciplinary approach. It can be used to critique anything and everything. So a few of the examples are gender, culture, politics, education, sociology, and economics, but this is not an exhaustive list. So what did I do? Well, I started by coming up with my theory. I wanted something that I could use to analyze power struggles and that would recommend actions to liberate the oppressed. So I wanted something that had a practical action step, and I wanted something that could look at this oppression that was taking place, and critical theory seemed to fit that really well. So I chose critical theory, but then I needed something to analyze. So for my artifact, I wanted something that had a wide audience, that was popular and that a lot of people had consumed from. And I wanted something that included marginalized identities. And Disney, as the leading entertainment source, seemed to be a fairly good fit for me, so I chose 3 Disney films, Aladdin, Mulan, and Pocahontas. And rather than focusing on the entire films, because of time limits, I chose to focus specifically on songs, because everyone knows that Disney soundtracks are a very important part of the Disney genre as a whole. So the songs I chose feature rich oppressive language and represent the specific types of domination that I mentioned earlier. Then I did my application. I applied the theory to the songs. And first I wanted to understand the oppression that was taking place, so I did a lyrical analysis for this, looked at the context in the lyrics, and then I offered critiques and next steps in order to improve upon inequalities, and make suggestions. So, what did I find, you may be asking? Glad you asked. I found that in general, there were methods of being oppressed that kind of overlapped through all the films, and there were different things that each film did to overcome that oppression. So, in terms of methods of oppressing, the first thing that I noticed was that there was selective praise and critique throughout each of the songs. When individuals were succeeding in doing what society wanted them to do, they were being praised, and when they were not, they were being critiqued. So we see in Aladdin, when he's rich and Prince Ali and being mighty, he's given praises, and when he's a thief and having to steal to eat, he's being called a scoundrel, scandal, thief, vandal, street rat, and this other restrictive terminology, which ties into my second point, is that restrictive terminology is used. People are being insulted in order to keep them down and hopefully encourage betterment, but it doesn't always work that way. So we see in Mulan, when Mulan and the other soldiers are not being as manly as they're expected to be, they're being called spineless, pale, and pathetic, a sad bunch, and other restrictive terminology. In Pocahontas, when the two tribes, or the two groups, are against each other, the Englishmen and the natives, don't see eye to eye. They're calling each other evil, vermin, devils, savages, and other mean insults. And so what this does is it limits upward mobility. They can't escape from the system they're placed in because they're constantly being pushed back into it. And so to overcome this, we see in Mulan open-mindedness, where the emperor accepts Mulan despite her gender because she's successful. We see in Aladdin recognition of harm. The Sultan doesn't want to hurt Princess Jasmine, so he lifts the law that says Aladdin can't marry her. And we see acceptance of differences in Pocahontas, where the two groups don't see eye to eye, but they end up finding a way to have peace. So, what does this mean? What is the big implications of this? The most important thing to take away is that unmanaged power inequalities can lead to injustice, wrongdoings, and exploitation of the powerless, because they can't stand up for themselves, and even if they do, they're still being pushed down by society as a whole. We need to be critiquing this. We need to do something about it. So this study was limited by depth. I could only go into 2 songs because of time limits. Same with scope. I could only look at a very small fraction of popular media content. And perspective, I only have my American value lens, so that was a limitation. But that doesn't mean there's no next steps to be taken. So for next steps, I first suggested improving working conditions and wealth distribution based on what was seen in Aladdin, with Aladdin being generous when he was a prince. I also suggested rebelling against socially expected rules and roles, which we see in Mulan, and she's successful with that, and discussing and recognizing harmful ideologies, which is what the purpose of this paper was. So thank you for listening. I hope you learned something, and I look forward to hearing any questions you have.